Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 8th annual UAGC Early Childhood Conference. This next session is one that you do not want to miss. It's called What Children Learn From, You're Okay, and Other Mismatched Messages. Michele Benyo has been here several times and talked about grief, parenting and grief. She is the founder of Good Grief Parenting, and her messages are always spot on and just something that you want to hear. So let me give her the proper introduction. Michele Benyo is an early childhood parent coach, certified grief recovery specialist, and founder of Good Grief Parenting. Her mission is to help adults recognize little ones' grief and provide the support they need to cope with loss and build resilient skills. Michele is a master trainer for Child Care Aware, specializing in children's mental health and social emotional development. She has authored trainings on grief in the early childhood setting and social emotional support children in need after experiencing trauma, as well as the preschool curriculum for Camp Noah, a nationally recognized children's resiliency camp. Michele has recently published her much anticipated book, which I cannot wait to get. How am I supposed to do this? Hope and Healing After Child Loss, Parenting a Bereaved Sibling Through Early Childhood. Like I said, you do not want to miss this session. Michele, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
All right, on this next slide, we ask that you read some information that we have on this disclaimer screen. And by taking a few moments to read through this disclaimer, you empower yourself with important information regarding the boundaries of our knowledge sharing environment. And again, on this screen, we have a short disclaimer. And then together, we are going to embark upon some exciting topics, including grief and parenting in early childhood. So, Michele, I'm super excited to hear this, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tisha. And I am gonna, when children are hurting, this is something we're often so prone to say. I grew up with a mom who always was telling me I was okay, whether I felt that way or not. And when I became when I became a mom, I became an early childhood parent educator, and I started to just look more closely at how we as adults relate to young children and how those early interactions make such a difference in our resilience and in our ability to handle adversity in our life. So I want to address this phrase, you're okay, and how we can handle that a bit differently with children. And one of the reasons I think that we say this to children is because we don't really think about what's going on in their little we think of them as underdeveloped minds, but there is so much happening in there. And we can think about our own experience when someone says, you're okay to us. I mean, if we feel like this and someone says, you're okay, do we instantly feel better because someone says that we're okay? No, we don't. Something needs to happen in order for us to feel okay. These are some of the situations with children that can really cause them to not feel okay, and times when we as an adult may overlook what they're experiencing. And there are a lot of pictures here. There's a little girl in the upper left corner that just looks very distressed about something. There's a burning house. And there's some paramedics treating an adult on a gurney. There's a young child hugging, sort of not looking terribly comfortable, hugging an older person. And there's another young child looking kind of wary of what's going on. There's a huge barking dog. There's a car accident, and there's a child that's having a medical procedure, not looking very comfortable with it. These are all situations where the child is encountering something upsetting to them, where we as an adult may just try to tell them that they're okay. And they really need more from us than that. When we tell a child you're okay, what we're really saying to them is, I want you to be okay. We're uncomfortable with what they're experiencing. We don't want to have to make them feel better. We want them to be okay. And those are two very different statements. When we say to a child, you're okay, when they're hurting and they don't feel like they're okay, this is not a helpful message. It doesn't make them feel okay. When we tell them there's nothing to worry about, don't worry when they feel anxious and insecure, that's not a helpful message. We say it to them because we want them to feel better, but that doesn't tell them anything, and it really isn't helpful at all. When we tell them that everything's going to be fine, um, I'm always kind of caught when I watch TV shows and medical shows where an adult is trying to tell someone everything's going to be fine. You don't know that. And that isn't helpful to tell a person everything's going to be fine. And when a child's world has been disrupted and they feel confused and they don't know what's going on, these messages don't help at all. When a child is struggling emotionally, they do need our help. And we have two choices. One choice is to do something for them, to fix it, to actually do something that makes it better. And the other choice is to help them learn something. When they're faced with a big angry dog, we can help them learn that sometimes seeing a big frightening dog is scary and we just need to stay away. And if that dog's on a leash, we can stay out of reach, and then they're noisy, but we're going to be okay. So we can help them learn something. Or we can do both. We can do something for them and we can help them learn something. But too often we don't do either one of those things. Too often we want to distract a child from a situation where they're feeling like they're not okay. We might want to redirect their attention. We might want to try to help them forget about it. And sometimes I'm going to share a story a bit later where I could have certainly done one of these last ones where we judge and say, well, that's what happens when you don't listen to what I tell you to do. Or we might blame them and say, well, if you hadn't run out into the street, that wouldn't have happened. And so sometimes these are the things that we do that aren't helpful at all. And these are just more examples of what I just was talking about. We might tell a child, let's go get some ice cream. You always love that. When they're feeling sad or upset, we might distract them with something to make them feel better. We often tell a child to give us a smile. We say, let's dry your tears. This isn't a helpful response. And the other one, I hope that we are getting beyond this. This is something that I think when I was growing up, I heard a lot when we would tell a child to be a big girl or to be a big boy when they're experiencing a difficult emotion. And this isn't a helpful response. And when we respond to children this way, what we're teaching them is when you don't feel good, go indulge in something. How many of us learned to eat something comforting when we're feeling upset? I still sometimes can fall into that trap with ice cream. We also teach children that it's not okay to cry, that you should be happy, that you should dry your tears. That's not what we're trying to teach them, but we are teaching them not to cry. And certainly we're teaching them that it's not okay to have those emotions, that if you want to be a big girl or a big boy, you're not going to have those difficult emotions. And none of these things are appropriate or positive things that we really want to teach children when they're not feeling okay. Why do we respond the way that we do? I work with families who have experienced grief, And what I've discovered is all of the things I learned about grief that just simply were not true and not helpful. And I would respond that way because that's what I learned. That's what adults in my life did with grief. They didn't want to talk about it. They didn't want to acknowledge it. And I suspect many of you watching this presentation know that that's how you were taught to respond to situations of grieving or not feeling okay. We respond the way that we learn to respond. What does "you're okay" actually mean? It actually means I don't want to deal with what's difficult for you right now. When we tell a child they're okay, we can visibly see that they're not, but our reaction is, oh, this isn't convenient for me right now. I've got my agenda. I don't want to deal with this. I don't know what to do about it. You've got big emotions. I don't know how to help you. It makes me uncomfortable. Children being unhappy, not okay, grieving really makes us uncomfortable as adults. I want you to feel better. I'm going to tell you you're okay in hopes that you'll believe me and then you'll feel better. I want your feelings to go away and then I won't have to deal with them. So these are some of the things that are going on with us when we tell a child you're okay. But the child needs something from us. And I think as early childhood professionals, we tune into what children really need. A lot of times, as adults out in the world, before I was a mom, I think I was probably somewhat guilty of this, not always really thinking about what does this child need right now. And I've already addressed a couple of choices that we can make. We can either do something to make it better for them, or we can teach them something, or do both. But as the adult in the situation where their child is not okay, we need to not think those responses that I just showed were really focused on us. And, it's inconvenient for me. I don't know what to do in this situation. I'm uncomfortable with this child being so upset. I just want them to feel better. What we need to do is focus on what the child needs. And we do this when children are newborns, when they're toddlers, when a little one cries. We go to them, we meet their needs, we pick them up, we hug them, we try to figure out what they need, if they're hungry, if they've got a wet diaper, whatever it is that they may need, and we try to meet those needs. But just a few short years later, we find ourselves responding to children very differently. We sometimes are seeing their behavior as something that we don't really like, so we want them to behave differently. We're more focused on what they're doing and how they're acting than why they're doing those things and acting that way. And so we've sort of taken away that scaffolding that we were so good about giving them when they were little. And when they get to be a bit older, we're expecting them to know how to manage those emotions and behave in the way that we want them to. And a lot of our responses about behaviors that make us uncomfortable and that we aren't sure how to handle, a lot of our responses really put it back on the child, even though we haven't equipped them to handle it. So let's look at what emotional development is. It starts the moment we're born and we start experiencing emotions. Little ones experience all of these emotions that come out when they cry and when they coo and when they behave in the ways that we respond to. So emotional development is, first of all, just emerging responses to our environment where we start to experience emotions, express them, understand them, and regulate them, which is something we usually need help to do. And these capacities grow throughout childhood, adolescence, and adulthood. One of the areas that I do most of my training in is emotional development of young children. And it is so interesting when we think about it, and You're Okay is just one of those examples where we as adults aren't always able to manage the things that we expect children to. Our emotional development continues on into adulthood. And it occurs in conjunction with all of the other things developing in our bodies, our brain development, the things that we're learning, and the ways that we're learning to behave. When you think about emotional development as compared to cognitive development and physical development, for example, we all kind of learn cognitively at the same pace, or not at the same pace necessarily, but in the same order, sort of chronologically the same. We go from crawling to stepping to walking to running, and we can kind of expect some of those developments to happen naturally. The same for most children, but emotional development isn't quite as straightforward, and we need to really consider the social and cultural context as well as all of the other things that contribute to emotional development. So it's certainly a lot more complex. Emotions impact everything about our interactions, our attention, our memory, our learning, our ability to build relationships with others, and our physical and mental health. It impacts everything. And we talk a lot about emotional intelligence, and it really starts with perceiving emotions and then learning to understand them and learning to use them appropriately. What's the appropriate emotional response to the circumstance that we're in, and then how do we manage it? And so this visual just kind of shows those four components of emotional intelligence. And Salovey and Meyer, who are two experts in the field of emotional intelligence, say that emotional intelligence is a set of skills associated with monitoring one's own and others' emotions and the ability to use emotions to guide one's thinking and actions. And two other researchers in the field of emotional intelligence, Mark Brackett and Susan Rivers, have come up with an acronym that they use to talk about the skills that we can learn as human beings, and certainly that we can teach children. And it spells the acronym RULER. And the first one is R, recognizing emotions in oneself and others. And we help children do this when we're doing story time with them, when we're pointing out to them how their behaviors affect others in their classrooms. We help them to recognize how what they're doing is impacting others, as well as how what's happening to them is impacting them. We understand U is understanding the causes and consequences of emotions. A lot of what we do with children in these social situations is help them understand how their behavior is affecting someone else, or helping them to recognize why they're experiencing an emotion they are because of something that happened to them that they're maybe unhappy about or worried about. So the U is understanding the causes and consequences of emotions. L is labeling emotions accurately. And I know that in early childhood, we do a lot of helping children label their emotions. And what I really want to challenge us all to do is to label those emotions as more than just happy, sad, mad, and glad. And yeah. Those basic emotions, there are so many others that we can help children recognize: being worried, being disappointed, being embarrassed, Many of those emotions are things that children need to learn as well because they're different than some of those basics that we give them. But the L in the ruler acronym is labeling emotions accurately. And the E is expressing emotions in ways that are appropriate for the time, place, and culture. And expressing emotions appropriately is something we spend a lot of time on with little ones in early childhood because, as I pointed out in the earlier slide, those emotions just kind of emerge in response to what we're experiencing in our environment. And managing them in appropriate ways is a whole additional skill that children need to learn. So the E is expressing emotions in ways that are appropriate. And the R is regulating emotions. And again, we spend so much time in early childhood classrooms helping children regulate emotions. And the thing that's important for us to keep in mind is that these are skills that children need to learn. They don't come equipped with these things. We need to help them regulate emotions. And truth be told, when we think about ourselves as adults, we are still, many of us, learning many of these things ourselves, how to regulate emotions, how to express them appropriately, and recognize them in ourselves and others. When we tell children you're okay, and we haven't taught them how to be okay, we're teaching them things that we don't really want to teach them, things that aren't helpful. We're teaching them that they should be okay even if they don't feel okay. So if we don't do those 5 steps that we just looked at in the ruler acronym, and we're just telling them you're okay and they don't feel okay, then they question their own experience of their emotions. Someone's telling me I'm okay, I don't feel okay, maybe I should feel okay. And they can learn that their feelings must be wrong. I don't feel okay, but the adult who knows better than I do is telling me I'm okay, so my feelings must be wrong. I want to just share here because uh, early in this presentation, I said that um, why do we tell kids the things we tell them? And it's because it's what we learned. And I want to share a couple of stories here. If you've heard me speak before in these conferences, you've heard me tell the story of the first photo here, which is just an expanse of water. It's Lake of the Woods up in northern Minnesota, where I grew up. And I had a grief experience that I remember so clearly to this day when I was probably about 6. And I was playing on the beach with Wally the walrus. He was a blow-up toy. And I was having great fun riding on him until I fell off, and he scooted out away from me. And the wind took him out further and further into the lake where no one could reach him. Even people who could swim weren't able to reach Wally the walrus as the wind took him away. And I had to stand on the beach and watch him float and float until he became a dot on the horizon. And I remember to this day, and that was several decades ago, and I remember to this day how that loss felt to me. I still feel this pit in my stomach. One of the ways that we often describe a child's response to loss is sadness. And this feeling that I felt was so much more than sadness. It was grief. And yet my mother said, "Oh, that's too bad. Oh, go play with something else. We've got lots of other things to play with." Um, she really reacted as though it wasn't that big a deal. It was something unfortunate, but just go on and play with something else. This taught me that those big feelings that I had didn't really have anywhere to go and didn't really validate those feelings in any way for me. contrast that with the story of Lucky, who is the little stuffed toy in the second picture. He's seen better days. He's been loved for about almost 30 years. He's my daughter's little stuffed dog that she got when we did a trip to Disney World. Her brother bought it for her, and her brother died of cancer when she was 3.5, and Lucky was her connection to him, and she just loved Lucky, and he was so special and important. And we took a trip in the car once where we stopped overnight at a hotel and then proceeded to get in the car and drive 6 hours to get home. And before we left the hotel, I said to Deanna, now be sure you've got Lucky and be sure you've got your blanket. And she was 4 or 5. The only thing she was responsible for was Lucky. And 2 hours down the road, she couldn't find Lucky. And we realized that she hadn't gotten Lucky out of the bed and he was still back in the hotel. And I knew how precious Lucky was to her, and certainly more precious because of his history of being a gift from her brother who had died. And truth be told, he was precious to me. And so we turned around. I called and found out that, yes, they had recovered Lucky, but I wasn't going to trust them to mail him to us. We turned around and drove the 2 hours back to get Lucky and then drove home. And so added 4 hours to our trip. But I didn't berate my daughter. My response to that loss event was that this was something really precious. And of course, I told her, next time when I say look for Lucky, look for Lucky. Whoops. But I taught her a different lesson with that encounter, and I guess it's not my next slide. I thought it was. Um, I'm going to skip to this one. Some of the things that we teach children, and one of the things that I taught her is included in this slide. First of all, sometimes when they are experiencing something and we want to say they're okay, is it ever appropriate to say you're okay? Absolutely. I'm not suggesting that we never tell a child you're okay. Sometimes we do want them to recognize that the situation is one where something's happened, but they are okay. Sometimes there are consequences. Sometimes there's something they can do about it. And sometimes we can't fix it. I'm on the wrong slide here, but I'll get there. Sometimes we can't fix it, and sometimes the lesson that we want them to learn is that they are more important than the consequence. And that's the lesson that I wanted to teach my daughter, or that I taught her with Lucky. But when a child is experiencing something and we want them to feel okay, where we may say you're okay, and it's perfectly fine to say that, but we're going to accompany it with one of these other things that we want them to learn, that sometimes things happen, but we can still be okay. Sometimes we've made choices or we've done things that have consequences. Sometimes there's something that we can do about it, and we want to equip children to help themselves, not just to count on us to fix it for them. And sometimes there are things that we can't fix, like Wally floating away. There was nothing we could do about that. We couldn't fix it. But with Lucky, we turned around and got him because she was more important than the consequence. Ultimately, we want children to learn that when something happens that makes them feel like they're not okay, they might be able to do something about it. They don't need to be stuck in a place of not feeling okay and not feeling empowered. And we want to teach them that we are there to help them, that that we do want them to be okay and we are willing to help them. And we also want to teach them that they can make choices about what they want to do about it. Um, and so we're empowering the child to help themselves be okay. And the way that we equip them to consider those questions that we just looked at are by interacting with them on a daily basis with essential messages that help the child feel competent and capable. This is really when a child is not feeling okay. Two things that we want to do are to acknowledge that there's a reason for it and also to help them understand what they can do to feel okay. That's ultimately what we want to give them. And essential messages are the ways that we interact with them that tell them that they're important, that their feelings matter. In the case of Wally floating away, to acknowledge how bad that felt to me was an important message that I needed to get in that situation, not just, oh, you're okay, go play with something else. I am here for you. You are listened to. You are cared for. You are safe with me. I know you can handle this, and I believe in you. What are the ways when we interact with a child that's having a difficulty that we help them to believe these things about themselves and to believe that we believe these things about them? As early childhood educators and caregivers, these are the messages that we want to give children every day in the way that we interact with them. And when we give them these messages, we are equipping them to know that they can be okay. I read a blog post the other day and it made me include this slide because one of the things that I think when we're talking about the whole question of telling a child they're okay and trying to make them feel better, one of the questions that comes in is, does too much love and affection and empathy and compassion spoil a child? Sometimes when we tell a child they're okay, or when we try to help them move on from a difficult situation, it's because we don't want to coddle them, because we don't want them to be dependent, or what some of those words might be that we apply to it. But I'm here to tell you that one of the ways that we make children feel most secure are to show them that love and affection and empathy and compassion, that it's not going to spoil them, but it's going to empower them and equip them. And this is just reinforcing those essential messages that are so important for us to hear and to learn so that we can know how we can be okay and grow up to be people who know how to be okay. The power of validation is huge. When a child is feeling sad or feeling hurt or feeling afraid or worried, validating is the first thing that we can do to make them feel better, and acknowledge it with statements like these. Wow, you're really mad right now, aren't you? Tell me what happened. That doesn't feel very good, does it? No wonder you're so upset. I'd be upset too if that happened to me. That must feel so awful. It sounds like that really hurt your feelings. I can hear you're worried about your mommy. This is validation. And this is the step that sometimes we skip when we're trying to tell a child that they're okay. If their mom is being hauled away on a gurney by an ambulance, we might be inclined to tell that child, it's going to be okay. You're going to be okay. Your mom's going to be okay. first, we want to validate what it is that they're experiencing. This is often the missing step. And it's so powerful because it's acknowledging to the child that what they're experiencing makes sense and that we understand it. And then we can move on to help them with the "you're okay" or "this is how you can be okay" part of the equation. So validation is really key. Heimgenott said it is a deep comfort to a child to discover that their feelings are a normal part of the human experience. There's no better way to convey that than to understand them. At times of strong emotion, there is nothing as comforting and helpful as a person who listens and understands. And as I started working with families that are experiencing that hardest of emotions and that hardest of experiences of grief, where we're often so intimidated as adults about how to support children, it's really very simple. As Heimgenott says, it's really just about listening and understanding and being close with the child that has these feelings and letting them know that what they're experiencing makes sense and that we are going to help them move on from there. And this is how we build resilience in children. And again, as early childhood educators and caregivers, we talk a lot and think a lot about building resilience in children. It causes us often to think about our own level of resilience. Again, resilience is something that we aren't born with. It's not a quality that we either have or don't have. It's something that we develop in the ways that we respond and are helped to respond to the circumstances in our lives. And when we get to be adults in a difficult situation, if we don't feel resilient, we can learn resilience. And certainly we can teach resilience to children. And I love the description by Anne Maston, who studies resilience and says that resilience is just ordinary magic. And she said, what began as a quest to understand the extraordinary has revealed the power of the ordinary. Resilience does not come from rare and special qualities, but from the everyday magic of ordinary minds, brains, and the bodies of children. Children are built to be resilient. We often describe them as resilient, and then we kind of think of that as a reason to not necessarily worry about them or be concerned about what they need. And they are resilient, but they learn that and they are helped to do that, to become resilient by the ways that we support them as adults with those essential messages and with that compassion that we talked about a minute ago. And John Gottman, who authored the emotion coaching method, describes magic moments or resilience as being emotions plus connection. And so again, when children are not okay and we're uncomfortable with what's going on with them, it really, our response to them really can be as simple as connecting with them. And that's what creates the magic. That's what creates the resilience. And that's what will help children to be okay. And so we're going to look at emotion coaching. This is something that, again, it sounds like a complicated method, but it's really just paying attention to what that little person needs and providing that to them. And it starts with the power of connection. When a child is feeling a big emotion, when they are displaying that they're not okay, connecting with them can be so powerful, and it can be the one thing that makes such a difference. It begins with us stopping and dropping our agenda. I think a lot of times as adults and in a classroom where you've got a group of children and you've got a plan for the day, sometimes that agenda can get in the way of the connection that a child needs. Certainly as a parent, it can get in the way of what our child needs. But if we can just stop and drop our agenda and make that connection, it's powerful. And we can connect emotionally with touch, with a gentle word, certainly with eye contact. And we can create safety with our touch, with our tone, with our attitude. Um, that had to be part of my response to my daughter when she left Lucky behind. Of course, I didn't relish the idea of adding 4 hours to our trip, but I had to have the attitude that this was important to her and create safety for her in recognizing that she had not done what she was supposed to do. And then along with that is the verbal message or the nonverbal message that I will help you. You're safe. You can handle this. I will help you. We'll get through this together. So connection is the first step. And I'm just going to look at the 5 steps of emotion coaching. I've just mentioned the first one. Connect and create safety. And these are things we do in our families and things that we do in our classrooms. Empathize with the child, really validate. This is more of what I said earlier about validating that what they're experiencing and what they're expressing makes sense. We may not like it. We don't have to condone it or agree with it, but it makes sense that they would feel the way they're feeling and respond the way they're responding. And so to empathize with that is powerful. And then as we try to describe what we're seeing or what we think the child is feeling, and we're going to be helping them identify that, we want to make sure that what we're identifying is really what's going on with them. I think the thing that I had to learn as I wanted to become an empathetic parent and adult is recognizing that sometimes I may think I know what the child is feeling, but I may be wrong. And so certainly allowing the child to express a correction to what I'm targeting as they're feeling or what the situation is important. Double check to make sure that they are feeling understood. And then to deepen the conversation is simply to talk more about what happened, what they can do about it, what we can do about it. Engage in discussion about why this is important to them and give it the due that it needs, and then problem solve. Emotion coaching isn't by any means simply accepting children's emotions and letting them behave however they want to, with a little bit of guidance about how to do it more appropriately. We also do have limits that we need to set and boundaries that we need to hold. And so the problem solving part and the how could we do it differently next time part is really key. But if we have done the first 4 steps, then that whole discussion about what needs to happen differently is much gentler, is much more connected. The child feels supported as opposed to scolded, and it makes a huge difference. So problem solving is certainly key in emotion coaching, but it comes after those steps that help the child feel understood and feel empowered to make different choices. So what we've talked about today is what we are communicating to a child when we simply try to tell them that they're okay without giving them reason to believe and know that they can be okay. That's the step that we often miss. Certainly our intention with telling a child you're okay is typically a good one. We want the child to be okay, but we need to help them learn how they can accomplish that ultimately for themselves. And it begins with us doing the things that we can for them, as we do in the beginnings of their lives. We do a lot of things to help children be okay. But then remembering as they get a bit older and they're learning skills and they're doing more things that we can't always manage the way we'd like, and we want them to behave differently, that they still need skills and we still need to help them with that. And so typically there may be something we can do for the child who's not okay. And there's probably something we can teach them to equip them to be okay for themselves. And so, what we want children to learn about being okay is that, first of all, they don't always have to be okay. When something really upsetting has happened to a child, and certainly when a child is experiencing grief, which is something that can't be fixed, loss can't be fixed, then it's okay to not be okay. We don't always have to be happy. We don't always have to be cheered up. You can have help when you're not okay. You don't have to do it alone. Again, in my field of grief, one of the things that many of us learned is that when we're grieving, we don't share it. Children learn that adults don't want to hear about it. Many children learn that. And so when they're not okay, for whatever the reason, we want them to know they can have help, that we are here to help them. We want them to know that they can learn things to do for themselves when they don't feel okay. And sometimes something upsetting can happen, but if you stop and think about it, you're really okay anyway. And that not every upsetting thing means that you're not okay. Sometimes you really are. You are capable of being okay, no matter how bad a situation feels. We certainly want to empower our children to believe that they can be okay, that there is a way to go forward from this difficult place, and they're capable of being okay. And ultimately, we want to help them learn to be okay because we want them to be okay. We care about them. We love them. We want to support them. Ultimately, we want to help our children be okay. And so these are the things that we can regard a little bit differently with children when we want to tell them they're okay. If we tune into their experience, we can handle it in ways that empower them. And this is how you can get in touch with me if you'd like to hear more about helping grieving families and grieving children, or more about what I've shared with you today. And
Michele, as always, I was enthralled during your entire presentation. I hope that everyone enjoyed this today, and I hope you will choose another session. Talk to you soon.